Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share tools and perspectives to equip leaders in self-development and team connection. I am your host, Natasha, and I am excited to share today's episode with you. Our episode today is a conversation with two previous guests, executive coach and podcaster Dwayne Dwyer and leadership coach and speaker Shawn Perry, who have come back to answer some listener questions. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm really excited about this episode where we're going to answer listener questions. So before we get started, can I have you introduce yourselves and tell us what's been going on since the last time you were on the podcast?
First and foremost, thank you for having me. My name is Dwayne Dwyer, again, the owner-manager of Innovative Consulting Solutions and Services. And since then, a lot of things have been happening. Started doing the recording for my podcast. Also focused this year on just scaling business. So just looking at increasing throughput, not just personal and professional development, but also in relationship enrichment. And that's kind of like one of the things I thoroughly enjoy doing as well. So getting a lot of great responses for that. So a lot of moving parts, just excited to get 2022 started off with a bang.
Natasha, yes, this is great. It's so wonderful to see you and Dwayne again, and glad to be here. Yeah, I'm Shawn Perry from Value Leadership Solutions, and are some updates. This has been just an accelerated time for some things. Picking up potentially a new client here, but a referral through one of my current clients has set this one up, and meeting with him this week, along with some of our local politicians here at the city level that we get together and see what I'm able to do for them. It's interesting that so often, even though we work with people in different professions, we all really wrestle with the same kinds of things, right? I mean, leadership is leadership. And John Maxwell says everything rises and falls with leadership. So it's a great topic to share and converse about. So on again, that website, right? It's moving. We got a lot of acceleration there as well. But really transitioning somewhat from just doing coaching to also more of the workshop type activities. I'm finding that with coaching, it's hard to coach somebody when they just don't know, right? There is a training element to that too. And so we're going to see what we can explore in that realm. But really getting out there and meeting all kinds of folks. And it's been fun. I'm able to connect this person with that person. They have an issue over here and they get to find some of the solution over there. So a lot of networking, just being a blessing to those around me.
Awesome. And I love that there's the theme of relationships and connection through both of the things that you guys have been working on so far for 2022. That's awesome.
2022 at least should be, given all of the adversity that we had to deal with over the past couple of years. We just got to kind of get back to connecting. I do a lot of Facebook posts, and one of the things I talked about is how the family is like the foundational piece of the community. And so if we, have better relationships, not just inside of our homes, right, but outside of our homes as well, then what we'll find is that our community overall will thrive. And I think that's really the key to get back to healing.
Agreed. So the first question we have is, I lead strong team members. What advice can I give them besides keep doing what you're doing?
I thought this was a real good question, because that's a horrible thing to tell somebody. Keep doing what you're doing. How more ambiguous can you be? Well, what was I doing right? Was I talking on the phone properly? Was I writing good emails? Did I get the project done on time? Did I contact enough people? Did I do it fast enough, cheap enough? So that's a horrible thing. Well, not horrible, but it's not effective at all, right? So I really thought this was a good question, because when you have people that are performing, there's nothing wrong with them. What do I do with them at this point, right? So that's certainly, I always start with, well, what would you like to do now? What are your goals? What kind of growth plan do you have now? Oh, you don't have one. Oh, well, let's talk about a growth plan, right? Let's get them energized and learning, because certainly if they, are on your team, you want to have them to accelerate and continue to add value to themselves, so they be more valuable to you and the rest of the folks, and then whatever it is that your activity is to try and get there. So asking them what they want to do next, I think, is a good thing to do when you've got top performers, and then what their growth and goal plans are.
Yeah, so I like where Shawn is going with this one, and I agree 100%. I think one of the things that I would add to what he is saying is that in conjunction with that growth and that goal plan, look at what would be challenging to them. One of the things that I've learned is that people who are very good at what they do, they get bored really fast. and then they get into the habit of multitasking and then taking their mind off of doing that. So find a way to challenge them, give them more responsibility. Go ahead and empower them within the workplace and make them one of your go-to leaders as well. I think that'd be a great idea. Being that we have some military background, one of the things we used to talk about a lot when it comes down to developing leaders is looking at their career map. If you have a career map within that organization, what does it take for the lead, for that individual or for at every position, what does it take for them to hit the next step in moving forward? Have them work, give them some more tasks that elevates them above what they're doing at that particular point in time to keep them engaged, to keep them motivated, and to keep them working with that enthusiasm and vigor that you're used to.
That's true. You've got to challenge them and then giving them something new to do where they're not going to keep doing what they were doing before, but right, something to kind of derail that one track of thinking in what they do. I had an instructor one time who was very good at what he did, but was getting bored, as Dwayne pointed out. And so I said, hey, we're working on some proposal work over here. You want to help out with that? And he's like, wow, that'd be great. I've never done that before, ever. Yeah, let me try that, right? So you're right, there's always something else that they would be good at that helps keep them engaged.
I like that you mentioned the things that are available. Right? Like if there's a career map, but also both of you mentioned that like what else is possible? What else are you interested in? I think that it really goes to that mindset of if I just tell you you're doing a good job and keep doing what you're doing, you're going to stay in one place. And what's successful now will not necessarily be successful next year. So you're absolutely right, Shawn, in that is not super helpful feedback. I also would probably add that I would ask them what they think went well and what they were doing that they had already accomplished, what really energized them. So that way it would give me additional insight into maybe some of their strengths. Or if there are other programs that are available, maybe potentially finding some, like there's like leadership rotation programs or internal rotation programs where they can try other things for a little while and then come back to their regular group. But yeah, I like the idea of what's available for us to look at as a map, but also what lights you up.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great idea. Like Shawn was mentioning, I had a boss one time. He was a very hard go-getter, real, very, very anal guy. I thought I was doing an okay job. I'm always like my own worst critic, but I just found, and I don't know what his perception of it at that particular point in time, but I just found it's like, hey, let me add something else to your plate. Hey, let me add something else to your plate. And for me, because I hate to fail, I was like, sure. But it kept me on my toes, it kept me going, and it always gave me something to do. And that's one of the reasons, in conjunction with the example that Shawn gave, that's just my own personal experience with it from the standpoint of an employee. From the standpoint of an employer, I think another great thing is to have that one-on-one conversation to talk about those things we talked about, get their insight on what they want to do, like Shawn mentioned. Giving them buy-in to their own development is probably one of the best things that we can do as a leader. So definitely do that.
What are some of the ways to break the ice when you first get some new direct reports that are in completely different work domains?
I think it's just simply connecting with people. Sit there and have conversation with them, build rapport. Sure, you may not be able to do that initially, but there should be some time made just to get to know them one-on-one, understand who they are, where they come from, some of the things about their background. As a leader, go to them first. Don't just have them come to you. Go connect with them, get their background, their experience back. Yeah, you have the resumes and all that great stuff, right? But there's nothing like that one-on-one conversation, because I got what the resume say, but you articulating your experience is far more different. And then kind of like we just got finished talking about, I can understand some of the things that you've done in the past that you definitely connect and resonate with, some of the particular things that really was your niche, like your go-to thing, like what you're really good at. As I understand that, then, again, getting into that developmental conversation as well. What brings you here? What value do you bring here? And things of that nature. I want to be able to put you in positions to where you can flourish. I think those conversations literally build that rapport between supervisor and employee. And it kind of makes you feel like you're a down-to-earth kind of person, right? And no one likes working for someone better than somebody that they can approach and talk to and have that personal relationship with.
So much wisdom in that response, Dwayne, as the leaders being able to demonstrate that you want to add value to the new people in new reports, right? I think that's great. Now, they're coming from diverse backgrounds, I guess, because they have different domains, right? That they're coming into a new team is almost how I saw this question. And so I think they want that, right? They want to know, well, what is this going to be like? They have a lot of questions anytime you're going to start something new. And, John Maxwell says, and everyone communicates, few connect, that people just instinctively ask themselves 3 questions when they meet somebody new, right? So they're coming to meet you as the new leader, and subconsciously even they're asking, hey, can this person help me? Can I trust this person? And does this person care about me? Everything that Dwayne described there really answers those 3 questions. So just the way you behave, the questions that you have when you engage them, then what you share about your own self demonstrates that you can help them, that they can trust you, and that you do indeed care. There was an acronym that I have been using lately as I've met new people, and it's been a lot of fun, especially in social engagement. So when the question says, ways to break the ice, all right, so here's this acronym. It's 4 letters, acronym, 4 letters. The acronym is FORM, F-O-R-M, FORM. You can ask people about their family. Everybody likes to talk about family to some extent, right? So there's this family, you want to talk about your family. Oh, occupation. What do you do? How long have you done that? Why did you choose that career field? What else have you done, right? Occupation, all kinds of things to talk about there. Recreation. What do you like to do for fun? Where do you like to do that? Who do you like to do that with? How long have you been doing it? All that sort of stuff. And then finally, this is always the fun one. M for message. What is your cause? What's important to you? How are you trying to contribute, to the community, to the world, kind of thing. So the acronym FORM is always a good way to do a little icebreaker out there. And you can use that just to manipulate any way you wanted to for an activity if needed. But can this person help me? Can I trust this person? Does this person care about me? And then FORM.
This is why I love these, right? Because I always learned something new. So I just wrote that down, FORM, right? Family, occupation, recreation, and message. Got it. So I'm gonna form everybody I meet from this point forward. I say this jokingly, right? But no, I'm so serious because he is spot on. Like generally when you think of that, hey, I just met you conversation, the last thing we really want to do is kind of like lay our resumes out. Graduated from here, I've done this, I've done that. You seem so robotic. But this acronym, Shawn, is amazing. And just using that literally makes you more approachable, more user-friendly, more down to earth. And again, it builds that rapport with a brand new person. And just speaking from experience, having, at one particular point in time, 4 different sets of skill sets in the same environment, I had to do a lot of this. I had to ask about families and where they live at and things of that nature and what's important to them, what was their background and things of that nature. I failed, Shawn, but I didn't ask them what their personal message is and how they add value to society. But I would definitely add that to my repertoire. I think that's amazing. Thank you for that.
I tell you, as soon as I can find a reference for that, I will share it with you. So it's,
I got a reference, Shawn Perry.
What I also appreciate about it is that it's nothing so initially personal, right? Like if there's this new person and we're just trying to build that rapport, sometimes people, they're like, I don't know you. I'm not ready to tell you anything. But I think that these things, and also the way they're worded, because when you think occupation, what do you do? But you put other questions behind that, Shawn, like, how did you get into that? You could go further, does that make you happy? Stuff like that, where you could really get into some interesting, right below the surface level things and then build that trust. So I really love that. I also wrote it down.
Well, one thing I know is that, and this is the source, Henry David Thoreau had said that he would not talk about himself so much if he didn't know himself so well, right? So I think even introverts, when you ask them sincerely and authentically, they're still going to open up with some of that, right? You're not looking for their complete history, right? This is just ice breaking.
I think another piece that I would also add to this is if the direct reports are in really different types of areas and maybe they don't necessarily interact with each other on a regular basis, I would either set up some kind of a group activity where we could all understand what each other contributes to the organization better, because I know that where I work, not every team makes sense in the sense of, oh, we all do leader development. So my team makes sense in that way, but some teams, there's someone who maybe does coordination for leader development, but doesn't report to anybody in leader development. Yeah. And so I think that if the leader can individually talk to people and help them understand how they fit into the team, and then let them speak to how they really help the organization and how they fit into the organization, then not only do the team members get to know each other, they also learn more about different aspects of your organization as well.
Very good point.
I love it.
How are you keeping engaged with your individual team members, the team, and engaged outside or upstream of your team? So that internal to the team and external perspective.
This is a great question because I think you have to be intentional. Setting your priorities and being intentional about who you engage with and the times that you engage with them. I think this is just, and I hate to reduce this question down to a process thing, but if I don't reduce it down to a process and a task thing, then what we tend to do is we get so bombarded with the everyday activities that we're responsible for. So first we make it a part of our, calendar events, like make it a priority to connect with these people, whether we're talking about team members, whether we're talking about external stakeholders, whether we're talking about part of the executive staff or just part of the workforce. We have to set the conditions for do that. And once we set the conditions by creating a calendar event, then we remove the task and then we become personal once we get in the environment. So I think the best way to engage it is just understand the difference between task and people and just find the perfect balance between that by setting priorities.
Right, you're right. You got to be deliberate. And it's so easy, especially for a guy like me who, I'm a procrastinator. So I recognize that hard work pays off in the long run. But I'll tell you right now that procrastination pays off right this moment. So, I'm a big fan, but I know that about myself. So I have to do just as you described. I've got to be deliberate about it. So I have on my calendar scheduled, one-on-one meetings, 30 minutes long, if that, maybe 20 minutes, the 30-minute meetings, one-on-one every week with a number of my direct reports, just to block the time. We can talk to each other outside of that all we need to, but I wanted to commit and be deliberate about time with them so we could just engage and focus on whatever topics we have to address. So that's the thing. And then also likewise for my higher ups and sometimes my peers laterally, I'll draft, just because as a work thing, an end of week update email. Everything that I accomplished this week that I would plan to accomplish, and then what I intend to accomplish next week, or what I didn't get done this week, why, and when I'm going to get it done, right? So I'm informing them so that they can make any decisions that they need to make, and then they can track, progress and the performance on the contract. So I think, being deliberate about it, however that works for you, I think it's a commitment. You're committing to other people.
I also appreciate when Dwayne brought up the DISC piece, because there are the things that are, of course, task-oriented versus people-oriented. But I've seen people who have an opportunity to engage with their team, and they do a really great job, because typically the team is also developers or also engineers, and they can nerd out about the data and about all these different things forever. But then when it comes to that external to the team type of engagement, they get lost. They almost see it as their big moment, and then they blow it because they just get so in that task mindset that all of a sudden they're trying to explain machine learning to the CEO. I love the intentionality and the deliberateness of putting those things on the calendar. And then I also think that when I think about those different types of engagement, finding places on my calendar where I have the energy to shift into another way of engaging. So if you talk to me in the morning, that's typically, I can pivot between all different types of things. It's, as Carrie Newwolf calls it, it's your green zone. It's the few hours a day where you have the most energy and you can engage and pivot the quickest. But if I'm getting closer to my yellow zone or my red zone, then all of a sudden it's going to take a lot more internal preparation to do those internal versus external engagements. And I know I took that in a different direction than you guys did, but.
No, I love it. I love it because green zone for me is like right after coffee. Red zone is after lunch. I definitely agree with that 100%. And I think we're just simply talking about energy management. So when you understand pretty much throughout the day, and I'm glad you brought that up because, I did a self-study on this a while back. One of my professional development pieces was to understand when you are at your best throughout the day. And whatever time frame that is, that's when you schedule your most important meetings. And jokingly enough, I'm not joking, it seems like after my second cup of coffee, I am wired for success. I am ready. But as the day goes on and lunch happens and about that 3 o'clock piece, I'm struggling to find that energy that I had this morning. I think we're just simply talking about energy management. So the other part, the implied task here, is for leaders to understand when they're at their best and then schedule those important meetings during that particular time.
Gary Newell, his work revolves around that too, where he says you have green zones, yellow zones, red zones, and you need to monitor how you approach your life for a week or a month or however long. Find the things that require the most engagement, that require the most of you, and put those in those green zones. And another piece with that is to know who brings you out of the green zone and into the red zone. I know there are certain people who I see their name flash on my phone and I'm like, no, I need to talk to that person when I'm either at the end of the green zone or potentially in the yellow zone, just because of it's going to put me in the red zone. So I cannot engage during a certain amount of time. How do you approach onboarding and striking a balance between giving all the information someone needs for a new role and not overwhelming them with too much information?
The very first response here is, well, it depends. But it really does. Not to be flippant about it. What type of position in it? What the time constraint is. Do I have 2 weeks to onboard this person, or do they need to pick up the rifle and go tomorrow, right? But really, so then the answer is to prioritize the information. Given whatever amount of time you have, you got to prioritize it. And something the sport and performance psychology world teaches quite often is using the acronym WIN, right? What's important now? Do I need to make sure this new employee that I'm onboarding knows how to do their timesheet this week? Or do I got to get them engaged with the customer and starting to work so that, next week we can follow up on some of the administrivia, kind of a thing. Or maybe the timesheet is the most important thing we got to get done because there's finances involved with it, right? So what's important now, right? Prioritizing the information you have to share. We know that nobody starts off ready to go right off the bat because there is company training, there's there's just the stuff that they have to do. They have the computer systems. Do they need to get any other, equipment issued to them and all that kind of stuff, access controls and all that business. We used to talk in the Army about, the phases of things. So you had your initial operating capability, which was usually, I guess in the agile world, that'd be like your MVP, right? Your minimal viable product, right? It's just like, hey, this is the rough draft of things. And then you work up to your, fully operational capability or your final product. So, yeah. So what's that approach? The approach is, what are my constraints? And then I got to prioritize what they need to know and make some decisions as the leader. What am I willing to accept a little risk on to get this person performing? And of course, it's always depending on how astute that person is too.
I really like what Shawn is saying, and I have to agree. Depends is probably the best answer here. Repetition is the mother of our retention, right? We pretty much understand that. And let's be honest, we've all been in onboarding sessions where it seems like we're in a meeting with a notepad taking copious notes because we're trying to gather all of this information. And once we get home for the evening, the notepad goes tossed in the corner. The repetition that you're going to receive, like Shawn mentioned, maybe over the next 2 weeks is key for that person being able to retain it. Just about everybody who is listening to this understand how important onboarding is. That's that person's first blast of what the culture of that organization is. There's that word, culture, right? So this is their initial entry into the organization. How am I being received? And I think that's important. Do I just feed you information through a fire hose and just pray that you remember it en route? Or am I going to give you information and then help you to understand that you're going to get a lot of this with your first line, whatever the case may be, over the next couple of weeks. So if you only retain 20% of this information, that's okay. And if I set the conditions right now that that's okay, then I have just helped you to relieve some stress. Just being able to conduct onboarding in such a way that it's not like, oh, if you don't retain 90% of this, you're going to get fired in the next 90 days. No. They're already under a lot of self-stress as it is, right? So just help them to relax, help them to understand that we're going to help you through this process. This is a we thing, not a you thing. And as the team is going to bring you in the right way so that you feel received well and that you feel like you're part of a family-focused organization.
Yeah, managing expectations, that's great. You got to tell them, right? Let them know because change is hard. Anything you can do to help unburden that is huge.
I know that I'm in charge of running a program for our new leaders, and there's a virtual workshop session, and then there are these online modules. And initially they're told go through all the modules. And one of the things that I like to tell them is it's 14 modules, that's a lot. And you doing that in the first 90 days of becoming a new leader is a lot. So So just to remind them that they do always have access to it. And when it becomes important and you need it, that's when you should definitely re-engage that. And I try to have that mentality, whether I'm an onboarding buddy or whether I'm guiding a new leader, but there's so many things and you can have access to everything and you can ask me things that you're curious about right now. And I will also have that patience and that understanding that you asking me out of curiosity versus later you asking me out of necessity are two really different things. Have you had an experience of a team member, team, or sub-team joining your group with the impression of work that they would be engaged in that does not map the business unit direction that you've been given for their work? And if so, how do you address that without throwing the previous team where the miscommunication appears to have occurred under the bus?
I don't know that I have ever experienced that. I have had new members, I've had new teams, I've had, sub teams joining the groups, but we all knew what they all knew what they were getting into because we've been communicating, right? So communication, right? The greatest myth about communication is the belief that it's happened. So you cannot over communicate enough during transition. And I think that's a mitigation for that, right? So could it happen? Yes, I suppose it could, because words have meanings, and what the job description describes really may not be what it is the person's doing. Now, I did have an employee, because I also do defense contract work, right? So I did have an employee there who's been in a job for a year and a half, maybe close to 2 years. And he came up there and he's like, yeah, but even what I'm doing now isn't what I signed up for. So I go, you've been at it for a year and a half, man. Yeah, you can't complain about it now, right? Or if you do, it's not changed in a year and a half. So why are you doing that? But communicating, and then documenting. And maybe somewhere in there an orientation prior to the final handoff of the leadership reins so they can kind of see that. But yeah, I think communicating early and often is key.
So I definitely agree with that 100%. Now, I don't have that specific experience that the individual who asked the question was related to. However, I do have the experience to where an employee felt that we should have been doing something more than what we were doing. And in their mind, what they wanted to do was actually fix the environment so that we can be doing what that person felt we should be doing, as opposed to what the actual primary work statement stated. And, Shawn stated, I had to, sit down with him, talk to that individual and try to point them back to, number one, the organizational core values and why we have this business, and then go back to what the job description is and what you're supposed to be doing specifically. And let's focus our energy there so that, number one, we can stay within compliance with what we signed up to do, what we agreed to do. The customer expects a particular work to be done. That's the work that we signed up to do. I understand what you're saying, and not saying that what you're saying isn't important. So let's bring this back to organizational leadership in the correct format so that we do not sever any relationship ties that the organization actually have with the customer. Bad news doesn't get better with time, right? So just allowing it to linger only lets that individual feel that they're okay within the direction that they're going. So you got to get ahead. You got to get ahead of it soon. And having those necessary conversations to kind of bring them back to what reality is important, not just for that individual as an employee, but also for the organization and the customer. Because if not, somebody is going to be severed, and we can almost guess who that'll be.
Something you had said is that, words have meaning. And that was something that I heard a lot in different, in the military and government jobs. But something that I hear a lot external to that is that words are fungible. And so I'm interested to see what you guys' perspective is on just that difference in kind of viewing how we use words.
Sure. Because you're right, words have meaning, but that meaning can be different depending on how you look at it, right? So some subjectivism there. So, if you say, that you have to review documents, okay, well, are you reviewing and editing? Somebody might interpret, hey, I'm reviewing, I review my kid's homework, right? And I point out what's wrong with it. Or do I, actually go in there and actually have to do the editing and redrafting? That as an example of a way where words can you got to be very, very specific, right? Since both Dwayne and I work in the defense contract world, contracts are written very specifically. And so you have statements of work and you're not supposed to work outside of those. And so I think in that sense, you just got to be careful. And even when you communicate it verbally, sometimes there's still differences. When somebody says, yeah, does it feel warm in this room to you? That doesn't mean I need to get up and go turn on the air conditioner, right? I can just answer and take the words for what they are, not look for the implied piece of it. You just got to be very careful with how you express things, especially when you have new people coming up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, if there's any vagueness in those statements, we have a responsibility to ask a question to get a clear understanding of what those words actually mean, because the vagueness that is written in a sentence can actually work out to your detriment. So, being very clear in not just the words that we relay, but also our understanding of the words. Let's be honest, we all have different worldviews on how we interpret things. And my interpretation of a thing may be different than how Shawn's interpretation of a thing may be. So it's imperative that if me and Shawn are working together, let's get together and say, Shawn, I've read this statement and it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. What are your views on it? And then Shawn will give me his views on it. Then after we compare notes, if you are our customer, then we get your feedback. So now he and we're coming to the table with the same mindset because we compare notes. He may adopt one thing, I may adopt everything that he says, right? And then now we're coming together with a shared understanding. And so what we're looking to do now is get that three-way shared understanding between customer, vendor, and the actual workers itself. And once we have that shared understanding, then we can erase the ambiguity that can actually exist in any statement. We just have to get down to the nuts and bolts of what they actually mean based upon our understanding.
Dwayne, I really appreciated when you were talking about that bad news doesn't get better with time. And I think when you're talking about a person, and we all know who it would be in those situations, who gets severed, oftentimes there are people who are in a leadership or some type of project management type role who don't have the skills or even the courage, I would say, to have courageous or difficult conversations. Or it becomes like the other side of this thing where we infantilize people too much and we think they can't handle it or they can't take it, when in fact, this is another adult in the workplace. And I think that if people could just be more upfront and say, I don't think that we're on the same page. I would like us to talk more about that. And even if we have to argue about it for a little bit, let's keep going until we are at the same agreement. But I think that people either themselves are too scared, or it's almost like they feel like other people wouldn't be able to respond to that well, when I think most adults could.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about fear, right? And it's a motivator, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, Natasha, I worked for a gentleman several years ago who his supervisor told him one time, he says, half the time after you leave my office, I sit and think that you don't know what it is, what I really want you to go do. And so my supervisor was like, well, then why do you let me leave? Because I'm going to go execute what I think you want. And if that's not it, why are you? His supervisor was not a very effective boss. But yeah, it's people sometimes don't speak up.
Given the context of the environment that we're in, I think most leaders want to be that empathetic leader that actually listens, that leader that extends compassion. But we must be careful. We can be an empathetic leader, but we don't necessarily have to be a passive leader. Passivity is dangerous for a leader. Sometimes we need to be able to give clear, concise, and direct information. That doesn't mean that you're not empathetic. That doesn't mean that you do not have any compassion. That just simply means that when I need to relay information, I do so. And I do it to such a degree that I'm not necessarily offensive, but I'm getting my point across. We all know we can't pour from an empty cup, right? So in essence, what I need to do is I need to get to the point to where I can be, number one, honest with myself. And if I can be honest with myself, then I can be honest with everybody else. So I need to be able to give myself direct instructions. Don't sugarcoat when I do something wrong. That was wrong. I need to, I knew I could have done this. I should have done this. I'm not going to smooth it over. I'm going to talk directly to self, and then I'm going to put forth the effort so that I can improve my behavior from that point on. But as a leader, now I can relay that same information going forward in such a degree that people don't necessarily feel bad about themselves, but they just understand that I see the potential in you. You can do a lot more than what you're applying. So let's do that. And how can I help you do it as well? So yeah, absolutely. Passivity is not empathetic. And again, I just believe that because this is our relationships, right? I just believe that the depth and the breadth of relationships, whether we're talking any type of relationship, it number one requires honesty. And again, to get to that point to where you have a more profound relationship, we have to learn to be transparent. I just believe that leaders have to be very skilled at having difficult conversations. One of the worst conversations that leaders are going to have is that, I hate to say it, that we no longer need your services. That is a very hard conversation to have. So leaders got to get very good at that. Not that you spend the rest of your career firing people, no. But telling the person that, they're not working up to their potential, that can be a very difficult conversation because you don't know how they're going to take it. Asking the questions to where you feel that your leader isn't giving you clear, concise guidance. Depending upon a person's worldview of confrontation, that could be a very difficult conversation. So we just got to get good collectively at having difficult conversations.
Jonathan Raymond, he created the accountability dial, and he talks about it in his book, A Good Authority. Basically this 5-step process where at the end of the process, essentially someone would no longer work at the company. But what I like about it is that he shows that it's in stages. You don't need to start with your work is garbage and you're not showing up on time. Who would say that? A monster. But it doesn't need to start at these kind of higher levels. So first you have the mention, and that's, hey, I noticed you were late this morning. Is everything okay? Right? It's just like initially coming out of the gate with compassion. What's this person going through? And then it moves into the invitation, which is, let's look at this pattern of behavior. And this is only, of course, if the previous things don't stop at that point. So if you mention it and the behavior continues, you get to the invitation, then the conversation, and that's when it gets formal. And now we're sitting down together. Maybe it's going on paper. And then the boundary is the next one. And that's where there's a time limit for this behavior to change. And then finally you have the limit. And that's this is your last chance. Like, this is your very last chance. And after this, there's no more chances left. So what I like about that is that it really walks you through, I'm asking and I'm caring. And now I'm coaching a bit in the second part. And now it's, becoming more formal, but now I'm putting on structure. And then finally it's the like, could you please, before this all goes awry. So I really appreciate how he walks people through that. How do you find the right balance on the amount of time that you invest between your diversity, equity, and inclusion and employee resource groups, which are typically in those you volunteer in those, people management, and your individual contributor or project work?
I think this might be another one of those depend questions that Shawn responded with earlier. I may go in a totally different direction with this particular question, simply because I think this is just a facet of being. Sure, we have a job, we have a responsibility that we're working towards within the organization. These are things that we're supposed to be good at as people. We're supposed to be inclusive. We're supposed to be to the point that we're soliciting information from everybody, regardless of where they come from, their walks of life, things of that nature. That should be an everyday thing. So I don't have to balance that out. That's a part of who I am. For that, I don't necessarily need to look at any type of balancing act. When it comes down to people management, so again, now we start talking about different echelons of people. I don't necessarily have to manage up unless we're talking about in certain special situations. Me and my peers, we manage one another, right? So we're accountability partners. So we help each other be our best. And then when it comes down to the employee group, their behavior is going to help me to understand how much attention I need to pay them. We have that high performer that we mentioned in the beginning. That individual may not necessarily need a lot of my attention. However, that's the carnal way of thinking about it. That person probably should get more of my attention simply because they are a high performer. The ones that isn't a high performer, they get directives, right? And then we follow up to ensure that those directives happen. So just understanding how to put people in positions to where they are performing at their best. When a person is thinking, feeling, and choosing in such a way that they feel fulfilled, they don't necessarily need a lot of my attention. They need me to show up and tell them, in certain scenarios, hey, you're doing a great job. Keep doing what you're doing, right? That may be the case for that particular situation. Then at a later point in time, there may be those more detailed conversations. So where do you see yourself going next? Because you're doing such a great job now. How do we get to that next point? So that's part of the people management piece.
You and I see it similarly. And really, I'd like to dive into this question with the person who asked it. Because really they're saying, hey, I've got so many things to do. I got my individual work I have to do. I've got to manage the people. And then I've got some requirement for, the integration and people and diversity. So I don't know if they were looking at that as like a separate thing, like there's trainings I have to do or courses I've got to sit through, or, so something like that as required activities, because as Dwayne said, that's people management. It's leadership 101. It's treating people like individuals,
right?
Because everybody is an individual. The Army, Natasha, a while ago looked at including safety as a separate paragraph in the Army operational order, right? The op order. You have your mission statement, and you have your situation, and you have your commo and logistics. But they wanted to have safety on there, and the leadership of the Army pushed back, and they just said no. Safety should already be integrated into everything we do. And that's exactly what Dwayne was just saying with diversity and inclusion. It's just there. It's treating people with respect, treating people like they're inclusive, they're part of the team, and looking for the commonalities, right? So I don't know if this person had the question of, hey, this is some separate thing that's being forced on me. But either way, whatever it is, and maybe it's not that. Maybe it's I got these meetings I got to go to, and I got to do my own work, and I got to manage. How do you balance all of that? Well, a word that is thrown around is not balance, but equilibrium, right? Because balance implies that things are all level set, but equilibrium is different. And now I can be high in some areas, some things can weigh more than others, but it's equal in the way that it flows, right? So it's your calm pond, so to speak. So equilibrium. I think it was Paul Martinelli that described, having a work life and home life balance. And he's like, well, what is that? My wife and I have an understanding. We have created our own equilibrium. She does not expect me to be home decorating the Christmas tree when I'm out making money for us. Right. So is that a bad work-life balance? I don't know. It's an equilibrium that we've worked out to each other. Right. So equilibrium, I think, comes in here. Now, this person is probably asking for some specifics like, well, how do I do this? So I had thought about that. And I said, well, okay, I've got similar requirements. I've got my calendar up over here on this other screen. I've got meetings all over the place, and I try to batch them. Right. So that's one technique I do. Because I do my one-on-ones with my direct reports. And so I try to batch, 2 or 3 today, all in, one 90-minute clump if I can, just so my day is not chopped up, so I can get my own stuff done, attend other meetings, obviously prioritizing. We've talked about that already a couple of times here, and then putting my to-do list on my calendar, right? Because we use Microsoft Outlook at work, and everybody can, see your calendar, whether it just says you're busy or you're free or it's white space there. But I put mine on here, my to-do list. So I know I have to review certain reports. Okay, I block out time for that, because if I don't, it'll be 6 o'clock at night and I haven't reviewed them yet because I've been answering phone calls and people are picking up, or Zoom invites. You're constantly interrupted, but I block it out and people know, all right, Shawn's busy at that time. So that's a technique too, is putting my to-do kind of on my to-do list on the calendar. And when you think about it, nobody ever says, hey, you want to go out for lunch Thursday? And I'm like, oh yeah, well, hey, let me go check my calendar. Sure. And nobody says, hey, let me go check my to-do list, right? So I've taken this from my wife and I put my to-do list on the calendar. And that way I know, okay, that day I'm doing these things.
So this is why I like listening to Mr. Perry, because he always reminds me of some things I wanted to say earlier. And he is spot on. I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. In the vein of Paul Martinelli, because, Shawn and I both listen to Paul, great leader. One of the things that I recall him mentioning is harmony. Harmony is the thing that we're after. And so when we look at that same to-do list that Shawn is talking like, I need to be able to look at my to-do list and say, which one of these do I need to do personally? Once I identify the ones I need to do personally, then the ones that I don't need to do personally, I need to give them to other people so that they can do it. That's empowering them to be better. People management. I think, and I can't remember exactly which book it is of John, but he talks about the Pareto rule. So out of a scale of 100%, I spend 80% of my time doing 20% of the tasks. The other 80% for someone else to do, or I do it at a later point in time. And I think that's really where we're getting at. Diversity and inclusion is all in there, because the 80% of the tasks that I do not do, I need to divvy them out to a diverse group of individuals and empower them to exceed and excel. And so that's what we're looking at. That's what we're talking about. when we start talking about some of these resources, whether we're talking external resources to the company or resources within the company, right? We identify the things in there that, because we should understand our organization, we should understand our group. Where do we need help at? Because trust me, I don't have it all within me for everyone. So I may need to call in a Natasha Orsolini. I may need to call in a Shawn Perry, because you guys are great at doing things that I am totally not great at doing. So let me schedule an hour conversation with you guys so that they can get another perspective. Shawn, much seasoned, allow him to put his expertise in there. It'll be great for them to hear from, a Shawn Perry. It'll be great for them to hear from, just someone else outside of the organization as well. And we mix these people up so that they're not all from the same background, from the same organization, and speak different languages, so that we can get a conglomerate of mixed information, but that information is within the development of the organization as well.
I'm going to add two things on top of that. So I love the concept of the thread we've been pulling all the way through, that intentionality with a lot of different things. And then with that equilibrium or harmony of how we go about organizing our day. And Shawn, I'm totally going to steal the putting your to-do list on your calendar. I love that. I would also say that I think that when we think about things, we just also have to think about things as a season. So sometimes things will be ramped up and there's just a lot of work, and that's what the season is. And a season is about 90 days, I will say. So we'll go by actual season timeframes, because if it's past that, then it's just how work is. So we can accept that there's a season for things, and maybe certain things will get more attention and other things will get less. And then specifically to the DEI ERGs, I know that in our organization, you don't have to, but it's strongly encouraged that you do join an employee resource group. So I would say anybody who is struggling to look at all the different options that are available there, to find out if you can join those groups as an ally, because then you'll get the emails, you'll get all the information that you need about what all the different groups are doing and all the latest and greatest in DEI for your organization. And then what you could do is just each month, typically an ERG, depending on how they're themed, will get the month that is the women's ERG will get, Women's History Month and stuff like that. So then maybe just visit one of their events once a month. If you're looking at how much time to invest in those, and especially if you're a people leader, you want to show the people that you're leading that those things are important. And I appreciate too what you both said about how those things should be second nature. And I think for many people they are, but I think for some people they aren't. And so as leaders, to just kind of show that, yes, those things are also important to me, and here's how I continue to make it part of my schedule. And I am intentional about not going to every single event. Look at overarching, can I be an ally to these programs, to these ERGs, and then can I just engage in at least one activity per month, which usually takes about an hour. What is your approach for people that want to follow a nomadic lifestyle, or the follow the sun method? And how are we as people managers supposed to respond to requests from our directs for this sort of lifestyle vision in their career development plan?
I had a very unique experience with a very unique individual that was just this. This kid was cut from a different mold. And I was a team leader. I think there were 8 of us on the team, and he was vocal about it, but fun and engaging. I just liked having him around. I mean, he was just fun to be with. But he even talked about, his role on the team was to be the wild card. And that's self-proclaimed, but he was, and he really was though. And what was unique is that he brought a completely different perspective to things than the rest of us. And we weren't all sane, but he was that far out there that when he had ideas, because we were doing trainings and in group, coachings and that kind of thing for customers, it was very interesting. I always looked for his insight into it, because he just thought about things differently. He saw things differently than we did. So that was a lot of fun. But the approach for people like that, okay, that's great. But at the end of the day, they got a job to do. And as a leader, we define reality. And in, Cy Wakeman's book, right, No Ego, she describes how don't coddle your employees. Your job is not to make them happy. Happiness is a choice. So you describe and make you communicate, here's the standard. Here's the deadline, here's whatever the performance standard, or the schedule standard, cost, whatever it is. This is it. So let's work within, your skill sets to do this. And then you've got to get their buy-in. yes, I agree. I will do that.
I don't mean to sound rash by saying this. It's not my responsibility to make you happy at work. However, I would love for you to be fulfilled. And that's what we're after here. So when we start looking at employee development, you're going to be a part of the process. That's really what it is. But that's no different than how I would do any employee. Some people just have a more structured idea of what their development looks like than others. But as long as they're part of the process, they have that buy-in, like Shawn mentioned, then I just don't view it as being any different. Again, the core values of the organizations is what we're striving towards. And if we understand that, then at the end of the day, you can be a complete wild card. But we appreciate everybody's personality. We appreciate every thought that everybody has within the organization. But at the end of the day, we represent the flagpole, the umbrella. We represent the organization, and we are all professionals. And so as long as we keep them steered in that direction, you allow them allow them some flexibility to do some things.
Yeah, it's part of the fun of being a leader is getting to work with different kinds of people.
Absolutely.
And both of you, when you mentioned it's not a leader's job to necessarily make people happy, it reminds me of John Maxwell. He had done a talk, I think it was at one of his IMC events, where he said, "It's not my job to make you happy. I'm not a clown, I'm a leader." And I just love that because it's just so accurate.
Absolutely.
As a people manager, how do you navigate a change of your own direct manager, ensuring that new procedures and workflows that they introduce don't negatively affect your own direct reports?
Yeah, so I think I kind of mentioned that a few seconds ago. Like, the organizational core values is always going to be the compass that we go off of. Change is good and change is inevitable, whether it comes from one of our directs or whether, it's something that, is kind of implemented based upon circumstance or situation. However, change is going to happen. And a lot of times, going through process change, what we have to understand, it's not comfortable. But again, being able to articulate what change looked like and help them go through that process, allowing them to experience the anxiety within the organization so that they can go through the stages of team development, it's necessary. So only thing you do as a leader is just help them through those stages of team development so that they can go through the form and storming. It's essential. It's going to happen. Embrace it.
Dwayne had mentioned the DISC behavioral assessments earlier, and one thing that we know from that is people that identify as a D have a completely different perspective on change than people that identify as a C type personality. So Ds are very ready to make changes, and they'll make it in a moment. Hey, is this going to help me? Is this going to make things better? Then yeah, let's do it this way. Where Cs are much more concerned and cautious and hesitant, like, well, they got to warm up to the change. So in that kind of context, as a leader, if you're effective and you're treating each person on your team like an individual, sort of where they fall out and all this stuff. If you don't, call me. I'll give you a DISC assessment, right? We'll do that. We'll set something up. But then you can leverage that, right? And so knowing where they are, you start to communicate about the change, what it's going to look like, when it's going to happen, what the impacts may be, and you got to be able to articulate that, because the team members are looking to you as the leader to tell them it's going to be okay, right? They're looking to you for guidance. So if you start coming back, I can't believe the changes, these are stupid, this is horrible, that's how they're going to see it. And sometimes you may think that they're horrible changes, and you have fought the fight and lost, right, with the new supervisor. So then it's not that you got to put on the happy face, no, it's going to be fine, but you got to still say, okay, hey, this is going to be tough. This is change. It's different than the way we've been doing it. We're going to have some hiccups along the way, but you know what? The core mission of the company is what it is. Our customers are our customers. We're going to get there. There's just a new kind of fun, right? So then you kind of turn it around. It's going to be something that we're going to learn something new, right? So when we all move on in our lives and do something else, this will be something new that we've done that we can carry around with us, that we can apply at a new organization or a new team someplace. And then when you have change like that and you are expressing what those new processes and workflows and new procedures are, you got to get that commitment from your team that they're going to be on board. I mean, you don't want to be dragging people into this thing months later, still lamenting and complaining about it. You don't have time for that. If you want to be a high performing team, you got to get the buy-in. And so I think getting a commitment, like, okay, are you on board with this? And if not, okay, well, what are you going to do to get on board with this? And if they're still not willing to do that, okay, well then, thank you for your service.
Expectation management through transparency.
Given your experience now, if you could go back to when you first started as a people manager, as a leader, and do one thing differently, what would it be?
Ask more questions. I don't know, I speak for me. Last thing I wanted to do was not be good at my job, whatever job that was. I did not want to be that guy. And so I was under the mindset at that particular point in time, make mistakes, right? And fortunately, I had some great leaders that allowed me to make mistakes, and then they kind of reeled me back in. But I think if I could turn back the hands of time, I would ask more questions. And then once I got to the point of running out of questions, I would generate more questions to ask. I don't think I asked enough questions as a young leader. In the midst of asking questions, you're learning from the experience of your leader, your superiors, things of that nature. And if you could avoid making mistakes through the conceptual understanding that you're getting through the asking of questions, the what ifs, the possibilities, and things of that nature. And I'm not talking about asking questions to the point of paralysis, right? I'm just meaning asking questions to the point of clarity. And unfortunately, no one will ever give you complete clarity, but 80% clarity is good enough to execute. And so I just believe that that's my one pinpoint answer. If I can keep it clear and concise, it would be to ask more questions.
That's good. You're right. Absolutely. I mean, John Maxwell's book, good leaders ask great questions. And it's really not just questions about, well, how am I supposed to do this and all that? And as, some people might think, but really it's asking my team members questions, getting to know them, the acronym FORM, being able to connect with them on different levels. I think when I was a young leader, I kind of assumed everybody was, on the team doing what we were doing because they were just like me. We were all motivated to be a certain way. And then this was the idea, this was the standard, because the group that I'd come from, that we were that way. And then once I changed, I was like, well, wait a minute, these people, so this is about coming into the Army. I mean, I know why I came into the Army, and I kind of assumed everybody else did too. And then I started meeting people that came in because they hit financial hardships, or they, it was either that or go to jail, or it was, a number of things, or they were trying to escape something. And they all kind of wanted to serve, but we all had different backgrounds on that. And once I came to realize that a little bit, okay, that was different. I never known that, and I didn't know that, I guess, because I wasn't asking those questions. I'm kind of on the Maslow hierarchy of needs sort of thing. I'm kind of a self-actualizing person. Right. So I'm always looking to improve and get better and have a growth mindset. I encourage people to do that. But I learned at some point that not everybody has a growth mindset. Some people just want to stay out of trouble. Some people want to be able to just do enough to not just to get by, but they don't want to be the state champ, right? They just want to be a good runner. And so that changed my thinking about things. Like, okay, well, I don't have to treat everybody like they're going to be a state champion. I just want these people to be lifelong learners and enjoy being curious and wanting to grow. So it did adjust my approach. It really toned it down a little bit for me. So if I had to go back, knowing what I know now, I would just, as Dwayne said, I would ask a lot more questions, and I'd really look to connect with my team members more effectively than I probably did.
Yeah, if I can just provide a little more clarity. Like for me, what I found is the more complex the question that I ask, the more thought I put into the question. Like Shawn said, good leaders ask great questions. The more thought I put into the question, I found that the person I asked the question to, they can't give me a simple answer. So they're going to have to think into the question and then provide some insight based upon the question I asked. And those are the questions that really helped me out a lot, especially when I ask, questions based upon their experience. Over the years, it gave me a lot of clarity on some things that I wouldn't otherwise have gotten.
Thank you guys so much. This has been amazing as per usual.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Equipping Leaders podcast. For more leadership development content, you can visit my website, natashacheyenne.com, where you will find my leadership journal with dozens of articles, and the Cultivation Cafe, which is always growing and has leadership frameworks, book recommendations, and inclusion and mental health resources. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha or at Equipping Leaders Podcast, and on Twitter at Natasha Cheyenne. Join me next week for another episode.